Field Notes, the monthly podcast of modern steel construction, the monthly magazine of AISC. I am your host, Jeff Weisenberger, editor and publisher of Modern Steel Construction. And our guest this month is Josh Schultz. Josh is an associate professor at Gonzaga University and is also one of AISC's 2 inaugural Innovation Scholars for 2024. So this is a new program designed to boost collaboration on a steel-focused project to be performed in conjunction with the Scholars University, and also involves a 2-week summer residency of sorts here at AISC's headquarters in Chicago. So Josh, first of all, welcome. Secondly, thank you for being here. And thirdly, congratulations on being chosen as one of this year's scholars. Good to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. It's been awesome to be here, so I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to talking about your time here, but let's step back a little further in history. Can you talk a little bit about where you're from and where you grew up?
Yeah, you bet. So I was born, raised, went to school just a handful of miles north of here. So I'm a Wisconsin boy.
Ah, gotcha.
So I was born. Most people can, well, in the Midwest at least, can recognize Madison and Milwaukee.
Sure.
So halfway between Madison and Milwaukee is Oconomowoc. So I grew up kind of in the country outside of Oconomowoc on some lakes and things like that. So.
Okay. Did you go to the Milwaukee School of Engineering?
I did, yeah. I did my undergraduate and my master's at MSOE, Milwaukee School of Engineering. Mm-hmm. And then when I was done with that, I wasn't sick of school yet. I was good at school. And I was able to keep getting it paid for. So I thought, let's keep doing this. So I looked into PhD programs. I applied a whole bunch of different places and ended up going like 4 miles down the road to do my PhD at Marquette.
Sure. Yeah.
so it was a pretty tight little circle there.
Right. Probably maybe not two completely, but 2 very different experiences, I would imagine, between the schools, or no?
They were, yeah, in the sense of, MSOE, Milwaukee School of Engineering, is very much applied. The goal is to generate engineers who are ready to enter the workforce right away.
Gotcha.
And sort of small classes, very industry tied. And then Marquette, obviously, is maybe more of a typical university feel.
Sure.
And then there's just that difference from undergraduate to PhD is a very different experience.
Yeah, it's a whole other ball of wax for sure. Well, so let's go back up a little bit. So I mean, So your schooling is all in Wisconsin, then all of your college has been all in Milwaukee. But what put you on that path in the first place? So how did you know you wanted to be an engineer from the get-go, or is this something that came to you later?
Yeah. So you might have to edit this out. Originally, I wanted to be an architect.
Oh no.
Yeah. So there's a artsy fartsy side of me. In the best way I say that, right? So I've always been attracted to kind of the aesthetic, and so I was interested in buildings and the idea of, being like a Frank Lloyd Wright. And
sure.
So that was one, especially being a Wisconsin kid, right? So I was always drawn to that. Actually, what happened was my dad worked construction, so he owned various construction companies and things in that area. And then because of that, had some connections. So I was able to do an internship my senior year of high school at an architecture firm where I was the gopher, right? Go for this, go for that. And that was really useful because you got to, one, get exposed to architecture and sort of the AEC world, but also you got to see like what really day-to-day looks like versus what 16-year-old me or whatever 18-year-old me imagined.
I think that was one of my first, what I want to be when I grow up was an architect, and my idea that it was that I would be like Mike Brady on the Brady Bunch, and I would design everything. I'd dig these mid-century modern marvels, and I could work at home. And then, I think I went to a career fair, and I was basically told it doesn't quite work out that way. And that doesn't stop a lot of people from going on and doing great things. But at my impressionable age at that point, it's not what I wanted to hear.
For a variety of different reasons, architecture wasn't the perfect fit for me.
Sure.
So then I discovered or found out through these happy accidents that there's this thing called architectural engineering. And the nice part about that for me was I had this desire to have influence in the broad design. Well, structural engineers have profound influence on sort of the structure, the layout, the topology of these buildings. And so that was always something of great interest to me. And that's what ultimately led me to MSOE for the architectural engineering.
Did you ever work in the private sector before going into academia? Were you ever working for a firm?
I did and do.
Okay.
And so it's a great question, because that's kind of every academic has their own approach, right?
Sure.
There's the research, the teaching. And so my approach, largely an outworking of my life, is, so I've worked in the AEC world since my senior year of high school.
Okay.
When I had that Gopher, internship. And so I worked all the way through MSOE, and I think the statute of limitations is up on this. I worked through my PhD as well.
Okay.
So I was working at a firm, Schultz Engineering, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, kind of a niche firm. Did a lot of glass, facades, cable nets, lightweight structures, things like that. When I graduated my PhD, applied to a bunch of different places, and through, again, a series of happy accidents, ended up working at SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which was a perfect coming full circle of wanting to be involved in that architecture and being involved in that architecture as a structural engineer.
Yeah.
And so I worked there because I was able to get through all my schooling relatively quickly. I was able to then work at SOM for a number of years, and then life happens, and so my wife and we ended up moving back to Washington, and so that's where Gonzaga fits in.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, what made you decide that you wanted to get into teaching then? I mean, was it? So you worked in the private sector for a while. And you thought, aha, I want to be a professor?
No. Yeah. That's okay. So again, the main reason I went to continue with a PhD is, I wasn't sick of school. I was pretty good at it, and I enjoyed that kind of stuff. And so the intellectual was very interesting. I didn't get a PhD because I explicitly thought I wanted to teach.
Sure.
So I ended up back in industry and enjoyed that very much. And then really it's non-professional things that led me into academics.
Okay.
And so, I'd gotten married and wanted to be close to family, and then adding in kids to the mix. And so trying to figure out a work-life balance where you can still be involved technically and do meaningful work. And so actually, Kate goes, well, you've got this PhD, why don't you apply to some places?
Sure.
And I said, oh, okay. And so we worked that out. But largely it was kind of driven by we were starting to have kids and that kind of stuff.
Right. And so you were in, I guess, Eastern Washington anyway. Is that a good way of saying it? Or
we moved there for Gonzaga.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. But you said your wife is from?
She's from Washington.
Okay.
Yep.
But not specifically Spokane.
No, Yakima.
Okay,
for those,
I've heard of Yakima.
Those listeners, yeah. Actually, since this is an engineering, since this is an engineering podcast, of some note, if you go to ASCE, the snow load provisions, one of the reasons there's some snow load provisions is because I guess 10, 15 years ago, there were a bunch of roof failures, and those roof failures occurred in Yakima because it's a desert area with a bunch of fruit processing plants that are highly insulated.
Okay.
And so we ended up, ASCE ended up modifying the snow load criteria in part for those heavily insulated buildings because they have these long flat roofs and things like that.
Right. That's the part I think a lot of people forget about Washington. There's sort of the interior of it is pretty much a desert, right? Like a high desert.
Yeah. And so, it goes, Seattle on the coast where probably most people think about that as Washington.
Yep.
Go over the mountains and that is desert.
Yeah.
It's irrigated desert. You get all this fruit production, agriculture. And then if you get all the way to the east side of the state where Gonzaga is, right before you get to Oregon or Idaho, you get this high desert, so mountains and then pine forests.
Yeah, sounds beautiful. I want to talk about Gonzaga a little bit too, and then just Spokane. But okay, so when you did eventually come around, so to speak, to being a professor or decide to go down that road, what can you? How long? First of all, how long have you been doing that?
Yep. So I about 9 years.
Okay, so 9 years ago, you're in front of a class as a professor for the first time. Do you recall what that was like?
Oh, completely. Yeah. Yeah. So I remember. I remember it very vividly. I remember a great deal of nerves standing up before the students for a couple of reasons. One, desperately wanting to do a good job. Mm-hmm. Two, for me, because that's what I can speak to, for me, there's a difference between you can know engineering stone cold, mm-hmm. but then articulating that in a way that is useful and tractable for people the first time around.
Sure.
That took me some practice.
Yeah.
As there's probably some students out there listening to this that jokingly, they're my first pancake, right? The first pancake's never perfect, you know? But yeah, so there were some nerves there, but mostly a lot of enthusiasm. So I really enjoy teaching. I just enjoy being able to work with students, the opportunity to work with students. I've been largely blessed to interact with just some fantastic students. And that experience is really, really valuable. The main thing I like about academics is that opportunity to teach and mentor and learn with and from students. But yeah, day one was a lot of nerves. And I remember, and it didn't happen day one, I think it happened like day 2 or 3. But I had the lecture all prepped and all this kind of stuff. And I just wanted to make sure I knew it stone cold, and I was terrified of getting a question that I wouldn't know how to answer it. I've long since, I don't worry about this anymore, largely because I also don't feel the need to have people think I know the answer to everything, because I certainly don't. But at the time, and so I think it was the 3rd lecture where someone asked a question or something, mm-hmm. and I had no idea, what the So I said, that's a great question. I'll get back to you on that. So.
Hey, I think you handled that pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I always felt like that would be the most intimidating part about being a professor, is the thought that you have to know everything, and you're right, you don't. And like you said, you actually learn from students too.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Speaking of just learning and teaching, and not just like the hardcore engineering parts of the job, do you have like a go-to piece of advice for students that are about to embark on their engineering careers?
That's a good question. I think probably 2. One of which is very practical, and the other one is, I think, more philosophical. Mm-hmm. So the philosophical one is early in your career, and this goes back to not having to have every answer, right?
Right.
Asking, if you don't know something, mm-hmm. asking those questions early.
Sure.
Because no one expects you to know all the answers early in your career. And boy, wouldn't it be embarrassing to not ask that question and 10 years later still have that question, because by now we expect you to know the answer to these things.
Right.
So I think there's, this idea of, your education will set you up for a great start, mm-hmm. but no employer worth working for is going to expect you to know everything.
Of course.
So ask those questions. So I think that's the philosophical one. Then the practical one, in my experience, both in consulting and as a mentor academically, is learning the perfect blend mm-hmm. between knowing when to ask for help and how to ask for help. Mm. So some of the best young engineers that I've had a chance to mentor, they don't ask you something every 30 minutes, mm-hmm. right? They sit and they work and you spin, and then maybe you get stuck, but you have a proposed solution. Mm-hmm. And so, because there's 2 extremes I think you want to avoid. You want to avoid asking questions every 30 minutes or something.
Sure.
But you also don't want to just go away, spin around in a circle for 2 days and not accomplish anything.
Right.
And so there's that learning, once you're out of school and you're working in an office, wherever, figuring out how to navigate the right amount of guidance.
Sure.
And that comes with time too.
Of course. But it's good for students to hear that from a professor, because I think I would imagine a lot of people or a lot of students come out of school they go to their job and they feel like, oh, I shouldn't ask this because I'm going to look dumb. And it's like, well, like you said, they don't expect you to know everything. And it's better to, and again, like you said, it's better to ask it now than to actually, wait and then, oh man, I should already know this kind of thing. So yeah, no, that's good advice. So at Gonzaga, can you talk a little bit about like your course load, and then are you involved in research, or is it mostly just teaching, or is or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, it's primarily teaching. Mm-hmm. So it's a primarily undergraduate, primarily teaching focus, which again, I really, really, really love. Mm-hmm. With a research component in the sense of, what are you teaching if you're not staying current?
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Like, especially in engineering. So I would say though, the teaching load is full. It's a 3-3, so there's a lot of teaching. So this fall, mm-hmm. I'll be teaching an upper level foundations design course, mm-hmm. And then a couple materials labs. So that's like your construction materials. I've taught statics in the spring, mechanics of materials, several sections of that, advanced structures, some analysis courses, steel, of course. Mm-hmm. So a lot of teaching, which is it's a great opportunity. Again, you kind of learn something anew when you have to prepare it for teaching.
Right.
Because there's this, of course, you can design a steel building, or you can design a concrete building, or you can whatever, but then simplifying that and then communicating that is its own skill, I think.
How did the Innovation Scholar program kind of first attract your attention?
I found out about the program through a colleague through LinkedIn, so kudos to the AISC marketing department. Sure. And so saw that there. It looked like a really good fit, both for the timing and for the topic. So I applied, and that worked out. The topic, or what I've been working on, and that goes back to our previous discussion, is mm-hmm. my jam, right? Mm-hmm. Is that industry focused, practically applied research, right? So you do your consulting, that then informs your research and your teaching. Mm-hmm. And so in particular, the past couple of weeks and for the coming year, I guess as a scholar, is working on simplified design aids, both for teaching mm-hmm. and for practicing professionals, okay. right? So you can have some really awesome work out there, and it's solving your fourth order partial differential equations and all that kind of stuff. And that's fantastic and important to do. But as a practicing engineer, I don't solve a lot of those. As an academic, I do. But as a practicing engineer, so if you can take it the extra step and take these complex things and try to simplify them for simplified equations or design charts or rules of thumb or things like that, I think that's really valuable. Is it the 100% perfect solution? No, but is it good enough to get you through schematic design development, get you 95% of the way there? Mm-hmm. So that's the focus. And then in the context of steel, so various steel shapes, some atypical ones, which again come from my consulting. So 3D curved steel, mm-hmm. And then tapering steel. And so some of these more atypical scenarios where I think a lot of times the default is, well, we could throw that in our software and come up with a solution, mm-hmm. which is valid. Right. But technically we can do that for everything. You can do that for all your why do we have beam tables, right? Mm-hmm. So we need, as engineers, to be able to do basic design and have a physical feel of what's going on. And so hopefully these will reinforce that.
To Spokane, I've never been there. I've been to Seattle. I've never been to Yakima either. But yeah, what do you enjoy most about it? And are there any suggestions like for people visiting that like something they must see or must do?
Well, yeah, Spokane is just I think a fantastic city. It's a relatively small city, mm-hmm. Maybe like half the size of Madison or something like that. Maybe a little bigger if you take the metro. But anyway, so it's a nice small city, but it has all the things. And I think that in a kind of typical PNW ethos, there's all the things you could ever imagine to do outside. Sure. Right? So we've got mountains, we've got skiing, we've got lakes, biking, running, so I'm a big on the outdoors. And so it's nice to be able to do your engineering, engage with that, but then 1 hour to the slopes, or
great.
hour to a lake, or all these things. So the outdoors is just fantastic, and the weather. Growing up in the Midwest, you have your 4 seasons, and so Spokane still has the 4 seasons. They're just tilted in my preference, where the winters are a little milder, so they're not going to get as cold. You still get your snow, and then the summer is going to be like sunny every day and dry.
The Zags / Bulldogs, I don't know what they go by, kind of both.
Yeah, definitely.
They've been a regular presence deep in the NCAA tournament in recent years. I've just got to ask, are you, do you kind of get, as a professor, not necessarily, obviously students do, but as a professor, do you kind of get sucked up into that a little bit, or no? Absolutely,
yeah. It is we all bleed, Zag colors. And it is quite an experience. In fact, we could plan ahead sometime if you're in Spokane. I think it's fair to say that the ticket item in Spokane are Gonzaga tickets. So seeing a Gonzaga basketball game, and I'm not in the student section. I can't keep up with them anymore. But just watching them, it's an intense experience. I've been to lots of different professional venues, and the amount of energy in that stadium is really impressive. So, and one of these years we're going to crack it. Well, that wraps up another edition of MSC's monthly Field Notes podcast. Again, our guest this time around is Josh Schultz. Josh, thank you again for being here, and again, congratulations. And I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. Thanks for listening, everyone.